Hello, you're watching World Talks on TVP World. My name is Sascha Fahrbach. After more than 2 decades of negotiations, the European Union approved one of the biggest trade deals in its history on Friday, an agreement with South America's Mercosur bloc. Now, supporters say it's a strategic move to strengthen Europe's economy and global influence, while critics warn it could come at a high cost for farmers and rural communities. Now, to analyze what this deal really means, we're joined by Renata Mieńkowska-Norkiene, political scientist at the University of Warsaw. Good to have you back on TVP World.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
So the one question right away, I mean, we were waiting, many were waiting so many decades for this. Some were hoping it wouldn't pass. Are we now, is this the final green light, or are there still kind of, let's say, technicalities, European Parliament perhaps, that could still hold this up, or is this now a done deal?
Well, the problem with the European Parliament is that it's something that still raises certain concerns, because the Cypriot presidency, so Cyprus is now holding a presidency in the in the European Union's Council. So they suppressed this point from a Coreper meeting where there was supposed to be an agreement, so a consent of the European Parliament. And we know that ex ante, this consent is not there. So Coreper agreed, as we know, because in the end, so at the end of the day, it's Giorgia Meloni who decided to back the agreement, but she was promised probably by von der Leyen certain deductions for farmers from Italy. It was adopted even though there was no consent from the European Parliament. It's not illegal, of course. It's still valid, and the European Parliament will decide later on. I don't think there will be any problem here, because everyone has really waited impatiently for this agreement to be finalized, to be signed. We know that the European economy really needs a boost up, and when you've just mentioned that there are those military maneuvers near South Africa. Well, one of the countries participating in them is Brazil. Brazil belongs to Mercosur. Of course, we need to cooperate with those countries, because we know that all this trade, let's say, between Mercosur and the European Union, it can also involve those countries and make it really far from beneficial for them to act against the European Union of any kind. So yes, there are, let's say, problems which are mainly related to a narrative and to the discourse here. But I don't think that there will be any technical problems anymore, even if it will be more, let's say, already when the whole process of exchange will already have been launched. So it will be way more difficult to oppose, because certain processes will already be ongoing.
All right, and I just also want to clear it up for our viewers. This agreement was now fully moved forward. You mentioned Coreper, which is the representation of all the member states of the European Union. That's what happened on Friday. So this is key, exactly. I want to ask you about but if I may, please, Renata, my question next for the economy. I mean, you said that this is a boost that Europe needs, but at the same time, if we're looking at some data from the Commission, it says that the estimated GDP impact of all this by 2040 will be about 0.05%. Now, that's not a huge number. Now, is this deal really that impactful? Do we really need it that much to justify it, or are we missing something here? Because some people will say that this is not enough.
No, we need that. I mean, the agreement will be signed on the 17th, most probably in Paraguay on the 17th of January. And from that moment on, I think the whole trade will actually begin. We need it because it's not only about numbers as such, although they will definitely boost up European economy, but it's more about, first and foremost, the market for our products and maintaining this, welfare that we are used to as Europeans. Even though those numbers might not be large, but I don't think it's that little either. But for our competitiveness and for this is a huge market. We are talking about 700 million people. It will develop most probably, and we will get simply new markets, even though in the end it will not be such large, let's say, amounts of goods, in particular from the European Union to the BRIC countries, but also back, because we are also not fully aware of the fact that this import of products of farmers will not be as huge as now farmers are sort of presented in public. Therefore, the whole volume might not be that significant. But in the end, what we gain, what we get, is a huge market for our goods, and it potentially will be way more than certain very cautious predictions at the moment. I think the overall volume will be way more than actually what you've just mentioned. Plus, let's not forget that the European economy, without this agreement with Mercosur, could actually get into a certain kind of stagnation, if not even a crisis, because we might expect it without investments and with huge spendings on military and security. We would also get way more dependent on the United States, which now, with all those millions of BRICS, let's say, inhabitants, certain countries from BRICS, of course, but from Mercosur, generally speaking. And Mercosur is also developing because, like Colombia, for example, is still waiting. Venezuela has been now, for the moment, excluded from this from Mercosur, but it will most probably come back, in particular in this situation now. So I think this market will be simply expanding, and those numbers will getting larger and will be getting larger and larger.
All right, and speaking of numbers, we've seen also the numbers opposed to this, and primarily also not just on Friday, also Saturday, just recently, last 24 hours, farmers in Poland, farmers in Belgium, in Ireland. I'm just wondering, as you said, what we gain, your words, what we get is great. Some of these farmers don't see it that way. They have not seen it, they don't see that we, as in the farmers, don't get anything. Their fear is regulatory. Their fear is that they will lose their livelihoods. How justified are those fears, or is there something else here that they're missing? Is this a lack of communication? How dangerous is the reality?
Yes, you really properly mentioned the question of communication. I think that here, after all these, like almost 30 years, the European Union's institutions could have done it really more efficiently. I'm talking now about the communication, because we've seen these fears before concluding agreement with Canada, and in any situation in which farming may get somehow at risk, of course, we get those protests. Farmers are quite well organized as regards this. I know it from Poland. But these fears are exceeded. In my opinion, it's really, and not only mine, I mean, there are really expert analyses which show that farmers may gain really a lot, first and foremost, because for them, of course, it's dependent, of course, what farmers we talk about. Certain farmers will gain, let's say, less problematic aspects out of it, the others more. Nevertheless, what I can tell you is that there are so many safeguards in the agreement, and we've negotiated as the European Union so many, let's say, points in the agreement which protect our farmers in case, first of all, there are any threats as regards food safety. Secondly, if on the market, there are too many products from Mercosur countries. It used to be 8%, now it's 5%. So when the price is raised for more than 5%, decrease more than 5%, then our farmers will already be protected. I think these are safeguards no other group could ever count on. And here we know that in order to conclude the agreement, the European Commission made enormous deductions, and it really provided for fantastic conditions for the farmers as regards general picture of Mercosur agreement. And both Italian farmers, also Irish farmers, Polish ones, and obviously French, they will get certain benefits also from the EU budget in case they lose. So there is so much money provided actually for them that even Politico considered European farmers the biggest winners of a Mercosur agreement. It cannot just come out of nowhere, this kind of evaluation of the situation. So I think in this case, this fear is largely exaggerated, and it's probably based on insufficient communication from the European Union. But let's not forget that the European Union's institutions, they, to a large extent, their activities are also communicated through national governments and national authorities, and here probably there were certain political gains and lack thereof taken into consideration. And we know it from Poland, right? Also, the Polish government was against, although we know that generally speaking, Poland will really benefit a lot from agreement with Mercosur, and the Polish government used it also in a certain political way. So let's be honest, it's not that innocent at the end of the day.
I'm conscious of the time. Just one brief statement, if you will, before we close. We mentioned winners and losers. Who is the biggest, or let's say the biggest winner here, biggest loser politically? I'm thinking of what happened to France, Emmanuel Macron. Who pays the price? Who reaps the dividends? Just really brief before we close.
Yeah, Macron is one of the losers, that's for sure, politically in particular. Who gained the most, of course, Germany and German economy. One of the losers is also Donald Trump, because now the European Union found a new market. And of course, vis-a-vis Donald Trump, it's strengthening the European Union. And of course, he would expect the European Union to get weaker and weaker economically. I think also it's China that loses, because the European Union finds new markets. So now we are not that much dependent on China. But Macron, now he lost, let's put it that way, although I don't think at the end of the day it will look that bad for France. But he won previously when there was a European Council meeting, and German Chancellor tried to push forward his agenda, but it was Macron who stopped him. So in the European Union, it's always like this, that someone loses, someone wins, but there are other areas in which those who used to be losers in certain areas now gain and win. This is just a negotiation, it's an interplay, and we should actually be happy and appreciate the fact that this can look this way, and we should just opt for our interests. But let's not forget, interests not of a tiny group of the society like farmers, and not taking into consideration bigger picture, which bring us way more benefits than just those which the farmers are afraid of. But generally, we should think about boosting the whole European economy.
All right, so it was 2 decades in the making, and now it's going to be signed. Thank you so much for all those interesting points. Always a pleasure. That was our guest, Renata Mieńkowska-Norkiene.
Thank you so much.
And thank you for watching. That concludes World Talks, but stay right here on TVP World for more. Goodbye.